Okay, we are live. Shall I begin?
Yes, Mike, please start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon to those who are attending from other jurisdictions. Good morning, good night. Thank you so much for joining us today. I welcome you all to this panel discussion on psychology of mediation. We have some really amazing speakers from different jurisdictions to give us insight of the topic and to deal in depth about the topic. I would like to introduce the moderator of today's session, Mr. Sameer Shah. Mr. Sameer is an advocate in India, an arbitrator and a mediator. He's director of CIAB India branch, associate member of Group Chambers Barristers, London, chairman International Dispute Resolution and Risk Management Institute, Hong Kong, India branch, adjunct senior lecturer at Academy of International Dispute Resolution and Professional Negotiation, Hong Kong, panel arbitrator at Court of Arbitration for CAFA, Netherlands, mediator at Mainland Hong Kong Joint Mediation Center, Hong Kong, the Mediation Center, Dubai. His educational and professional experience includes 26 years of active legal practice and experience. He's having his own proprietary firm at Ahmedabad under the name and style of S.U. Shah and Associates. He's recently been made the senior partner of Trust Legal, Ahmedabad office, having main office at New Delhi and branch at Kochi. He's attended as a representative of Hong Kong Mediation Center, the Working Group 3 session of UNCITRAL held at New York in February 2020 for discussion on drafting of rules for expedited arbitration. He has been actively promoting mediation for ADR in India, Hong Kong, and Nepal, and conducted trainings and workshops for mediation development, and also giving coaching to students and other professionals on mediation and advocacy skills for it. He's currently promoting online mediation training and proceedings, and he's currently developing an online mediation training module for persons interested to gain knowledge about mediation and its proceedings. Sir is also a senior advisor of ADR HOC and has been a backbone of the organization. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Meg, for that. Thank you so much, Meg, for that brief introduction, though it still extended a little bit more. But so anyway, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and good night to many. Today, we have been able to, join 5 continents, spreading from Brazil to Australia. So therefore, it's a truly global conference, what the session we are having today. And thanks to all the eminent speakers today who have spared time to join and discuss on this very interesting and intensive topic of psychology of mediation. Now, many of you are, mediators who have been mediation practitioners, or even students who have basic knowledge of mediation. So I'm not going to discuss, and the topic itself is not on what mediation is. The topic is actually what goes inside mediation with respect to the parties involved, including the mediator. What's their mindset? Why they choose to go mediation, or what are the reasons, what are the factors which make them not to decide, not to finally resolve, or which fails mediation. So these are some of the issues, factors, and the background in which we'll be discussing today with the eminent speakers. And without taking much of the time, because we have a line of eminent speakers with good discussion on board. So I'll just start with making a brief introduction of each of the speakers, and then we'll start our main panel discussion session. So to start with, first we have from Sydney, Australia, Dr. Paul Gibson. Good night, Paul, I would say, but welcome, Dr. Paul. So Dr. Paul is an internationally qualified and experienced mediator. and educator with special expertise in complex conflict management and dispute resolution. He's a former line manager and consultant, has over 40 years of experience in managing and resolving conflict. He works across spectrum of ADR techniques, you name it, and he has the expertise in all. So thank you and welcome, Paul, for today's session. Second, we have we have made it a diverse panel. So we have Ms. Olgha Tsiptse. I'm sure I pronounced it right, the name. She's a lawyer from in Supreme Court of Greece and founder of law firm Medilution. She is an accredited mediator of Ministry of Justice in Greece and has distinguished in mediation competition. She has founded the Mediation Center of the Thessaloniki Chambers of SMEs. So we were just discussing about, once the pandemic is over, we all would be visiting that place. So welcome, Olga, to today's discussion. Next, we have Dr. Adeyemi, who's a principal partner of Birain Associate from Nigeria. He's an arbitrator, accredited mediator and conciliator, and mediation advisor involved in resolving disputes throughout Africa and many other jurisdictions. He has immense years of experience in alternate dispute resolution with a view to providing strategic solution to the clients. So welcome you also, Dr. Adeyemi. Thank you so much for sparing time and joining in today's session. Next, we have Mr. Tony, who is again, just like Dr. Adeyemi, a dear friend from Vietnam. He is among the few Vietnamese mediators having been qualified internationally by CIR London. He holds the position of Deputy Director of Vietnam Mediation Center and has been a frequent lecturer and speaker on international mediation and mediation counsel practice from Vietnam perspective. He is one of the very first ad hoc mediator registered with Ministry of Justice of Vietnam. And beside the mediation practice, he is an experienced lawyer and arbitrator with his main focus on ADR. So welcome, Tony. Thank you so much for joining in today. And last and not the least, we have Dr. Daniel Ferreira from Brazil. So we have reached the other side of the globe from Australia now to Brazil. So Dr. Daniel is a professor at University of Cândido Mendes and Ambara University in Brazil, teaching the course of arbitration for graduate and undergraduate students. He is also Vice President for Academic Affairs at Brazilian Center of Arbitration and Mediation, where he is also an arbitrator. Dr. Daniel is also Chief Editor of the Brazilian Journal of Alternative Dispute Resolution. And his leading research publication concentrate on legal theory, legal history, legal education, and comparative studies. So we welcome you also, Dr. Daniel. Thank you so much for sparing time. And therefore, let us now start today's panel discussion. And may I just start with Olga, and if I can just ask you with a very first, startup question of what, according to you, is the psychology behind mediation? I mean, just to give a straight answer to this topic, what according to you are the mindset of the parties involved from the counsel perspective, from the parties, the disputants themselves, and from the mediator when they first agree on mediating a dispute? Because you see, each person mindset are different, and each jurisdiction's the mindset differs. Like if I give you example of India, we have a mindset of trying to prolong the dispute rather than resolving it. So likewise, different people have different mindset. What actually goes behind the mindset of people involved in mediation? Over to you, Olga.
Olga, your microphone is off.
Now you'll be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. I wasn't able to unmute. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good everything, because we are from different continents. I would like, first of all, to congratulate Mr. Samir Sam for this excellent initiative to put together all the continents today. And I would like to thank my esteemed colleagues for this collaboration, and of course the attendees that are willing to be with us together here today. I would like to reply to the question that is, what is the psychology in mediation in the side of mediators, parties, and of course advocates. The two professionals that decide to approach mediation. Please, next slide. Could you please change the slide? Thank you. The two professionals that decide to approach mediation at least as training are lawyers, because they think that dispute resolution is their field, their area, and psychologists because they think they can manage feelings and behaviors. Next slide, please. Next, please, next slide. When we talk about psychology in mediation, we are not referring, of course, to Freud's theories or other psychologists. Psychology is approached by sides, mediators, lawyers, and of course parties. On the side of mediator, the psychology has the meaning of skills that he or she has to show in order to help parties to reach mutual accepted decision. On the side of lawyers, that means that psychology means that he has the manner of prevailing against the other party, because at least in Greece, lawyers are not educated for mediation, so they think that mediation is something like battle in courts. Of course, the psychology of parties means that they have some hard feelings because they lead them, they have distracted relationships, and these feelings may be because of their culture, their personality, or their education. Beginning from mediators, especially when he or she is designed for a dispute with diversities, and when we talk about diversities, we mean different culture, religious, sexual orientation, and other differences. This means that the mediator shall be proper educated in order not to ruin the procedure. Mediator has the responsibility to be careful enough in order to help parties with different backgrounds achieving a satisfying dispute resolution. The danger becomes bigger in family disputes, where emotions take a larger place in comparison with commercial disputes, where disputes are not depending on emotion, at least as the major portion. Because in commercial disputes, there is a principle that is talking about pacta sunt servanda, so emotions go in the side. In my country, Greece, and in local mediation, there are many things that mediator may face. Mediator has to be familiar with the history of mediation in Greece, because the birth of mediation was not widely accepted. I want to remind to the Greek mediators who attend today's event that the first mediation law in Greece was in 2010, and after 10 years we are not completely accepted mediation as an institution that can help, of course, justice to be for all. Psychology of mediators in Greece in local disputes has the meaning of the effort that mediators have to act in order to face all the resistance, all the denial, and all the bad mood of the legal professionals. And of course, the parties who are led by their lawyers. That mood will be defined below, because In general, we can say that in Greece, the legal world is opposite towards ADR in general, and of course mediation, because they feel insecurity for the future of the legal profession. Mediators have to try more than is expected to convince all lawyers who consider mediators as enemies or something that is really not necessary. Mediators have from the beginning heavy duties to overcome the situation and to establish the confidence of lawyers. First, because if mediators convince parties lawyers about their integrity, confidentiality, partiality, and all these principles that they cover, then, and of course, the great knowledge of its item, its topic, and convince that they have skills, then lawyers can convince their parties to trust this institution. So the duty for mediators is very heavy. Greek mediators feel the difference in local mediation in comparison with cross-border mediation, where their role is well established. Mediators also have the duty to understand the aspects of conflict, which include the diversity of problem-solving approaches, communication and negotiation styles, ways of making compromises, the sense of physical space, venue, and time, attitudes towards the mediation, and the response to law, lawyers and professionals, advisors, and all this is due of mediators. In general, mediators have the ability to understand the specific cultural context of the dispute, for example, whether it stems from family, community, workplace, industrial, commercial, or international context. The issue of time is also significant for some cultural groups because the right time indicates the maturity of a dispute. If a dispute is not mature enough, no outcome may come. In this point, mediators have to play somehow the role of psychologists with a very wide aspect, to offer support through the guidance of a dispute equally to both parties, cultivate trust and confidence for the parties and lawyers and the procedures through the venue of time of caucuses, through his or her personality, which shall be accessible to and neutral to all. Mediators show empathy during the proceedings and so that he or she is completely familiar to the dispute and its elements and parameters. And of course, to prove neutrality and confidentiality in every stage of procedure, and especially after the end of mediation, no matter the outcome. For all the above, unique role played the preliminary meetings. That means the meetings before the initiation of mediation, when mediator meets each party with the lawyers and discuss mostly in general in order to create all the above confidence in the face of mediator. So when mediation begins, mediator shall feel very confident because he has established all the preconditions in order to succeed in his role or her role. But this is not as easy as it's heard. Many times this confidence is never established, even if the outcome of mediation is satisfactory, or even if it is established in the beginning, may be destroyed in the way. So every case is winning, but personality of mediator play major role, of course, ad hoc, not for general side. Then we can talk about the mediation, the parties' psychology. They have very sensible psychology. Many things have to take into consideration. The power difference, if any, different perspectives, issues of the confidence, for confidence to the institution of mediation or the mediator himself or herself, and all these matters that they don't know. Parties don't know where they are going. They are only directed by lawyers and of course mediators. So they have these hard feelings. For instance, and from psychological perspective, a dominant of inferior culture could have a great influence on the party, which may depend on identity, relations, and confidence level during the mediation process. Such identity could be due to a person's skin color, religious, language, accent, gender, or sexual representation, status, or position. The most difficult thing is someone to trust another who may influence his or her life. Parties shall be a way to increase confidence towards the mediator, who may be a third neutral, but still a third is a third, even if he is neutral. But also the parties shall show confidence to each other because they are the steering stars, so they may resolve their problems. So they have to establish the lost confidence. And that is the very difficulty, because after having been ruined relationships, they are calling to fix them again and start putting relationships into a correct order with the assistance of a third person first. If they can manage that, the relationships will be reborn like a phoenix. And of course, last but not least, at least for Greece, lawyers play a huge part in the procedure. From the beginning, they have influence even whether there is going to be a mediation or not. Parties have a strong affair with their lawyers, at least in Greece. Lawyers are professionals that rely on very traditional methods, and they think that courts are above all, and nothing is behind courts or apart from courts. They don't consider that they act as legal professionals when they are talking about mediation, where they are standing in mediation. In that case, they prefer to resolve the disputes alone, not with the help of mediators. So they are very aggressive when they first reach the first meetings of mediation. The reasons are many, but we will not stress them now because we don't have the time. We will stress only the psychology of them reaching the initials of mediation. They are putting a wall before them, mostly when they are reaching mediators. And mediators for first time, and mostly if they have not been trained as advocates in mediation. If that wall will fall through the duration of the procedure, they are being convinced that their role is very crucial, then the mediation will have a good outcome and at least a good procedure. Lawyers start acting to the right situation when they are convinced that they have a great role. And they start feeling that they are sine qua non in the procedure. I would like not to talk more because I may talk for many hours, but I think that these were the most significant parts in the procedure from the aspect of mediators, lawyers, and parties. And I would like to hear my colleagues for more information. Thank you very much. Sorry for that anxious because I couldn't unmute my microphone and this had an effect.
That's really a very nice start for this topic, Olga, and thank you for giving us the insight of the psychology of mediation from the perspective of Greece. And if I now invite Tony to just answer this question from the perspective of Vietnam. So over to you, Tony.
First of all, thank you, Samir, for inviting me to this amazing webinar, and also Olga for starting it very nicely. I don't think that I should spend a lot of time because we do not have much time for all the speakers to talk too much. And I have a separate session on counter impact on the psychology of mediation. So I only want to share one point in relation to the psychology in mediation. It is the change that I've seen with my own experience in the mindset of the parties from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, which will be assisted by the mediator. At the very beginning, as Olga rightly said, the parties usually started the mediation with an anger, and they usually feel frustrated when they look at the other side's allegations and propositions, and this can be made worse with the poor mediated skills lawyers. So if they start with the adversary approach, then they will try to play all the cards from the beginning and try to make a positional approach. And then the parties at that point, we usually look at the other side as an enemy, and they have a great anger that need to be released. And the change during the process of mediation by the mediator is actually how the mediator managed the process, set out the platform for the parties to release the anger. And this is from a psychology perspective. We will see especially the period where the parties explain their thoughts about the disputes from the beginning of the mediation process. And then through times via private meetings and also some joint meetings, we will see the change in their understanding of the other parties, especially from the view of their positions to their underlying interests. And if a mediator is successful, he or she needs to release all the anger and the spirits, the high spirits of the parties, to make them in a better manner to understand the needs of each other and to understand the commonalities between them in order to reach a solution. So normally at the end of the mediation process, we will find, or we have to find, a different psychological status of the parties, where they are in the best status of mind, a more like wise status, to allow them to understand whether or not they should go ahead with some solutions, or to accept some propositions from the other parties, or some suggestions by the lawyers. And this is really the core of a successful mediation. And I think the topic today is really about how we deal with these impediments, how to change the mindset and the status of mind of the parties from the beginning to the end, including how to separate and to deal with the lawyers' matters in the most effective way. We usually talk about the difficulties of mediators to deal with the lawyers when they play the hard game. There are a lot of technical techniques to deal with that. But generally, the lawyers are gladiators. They are there to fight. They are there to win. So we have to change not to change their mind, but really to make them understand their role in the mediation. That is the impediment or the obstacles that the mediator will need to cope with. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and that for explaining from the perspective of Vietnam what actually goes behind the minds of different parties involved in mediation, and also leading us to the next question, which I'll ask to Dr. Adeyemi, which you just rightly pointed out, Tony. What could be the impediments? We have just discussed about what goes beyond, but what actually are the impediments? What stops the parties or maybe the counsels or mediators from thinking the way they think, or making it possible or unsuccessful? So let's hear it out from you, Dr. Dedini. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Samir. I think it is very important in talking about the psychology of mediation to acknowledge what co-panelists have said, especially Olga and Tony. I congratulate you on this excellent webinar today. It's a very passionate topic for me, both as a cognitive behavioral practitioner and a mediator. And I think it's most important because of two things that I've discussed severally with you. The enforcement of a mediated settlement agreement. You need to enforce a mediated settlement agreement. I think when you need to enforce it, then it has to do, obviously, I think, with the quality of the mediation. And with the Singapore Convention looking at misconduct of mediation, I think it's very important that practitioners know how to manage the process so that the standard, which is a very high standard set by the Singapore Convention, is always achieved in cross-border mediation. So when we come to mediation, I think it's a question of perspective. Can we go back to the previous slide? We're looking at issues as we come into the room from different sides. And I'm happy that Olga has talked about the parties, the counsel, and the mediator himself. So there's a lot of emotions going on. Now, from clinical psychology, we'll talk about the amygdala, on overdrive. In a fight or flight mode, you have a lot of adrenaline, cortisol, and there's so much emotions going on. Please go back to the previous slides. And it's very important that the parties come into the room, like Tony said, as combatants, and it's the mediator's job to diffuse this tension and get a result. So virtually all psychology principles work against negotiators to make them overvalue their case. So you find that as the parties come into the room to negotiate, because we all know that mediation is assisted negotiation, the parties have been negotiating, but they've had a stalemate, and so they've invited you as a third party neutral to help them continue that business of negotiation. So that's what the mediator's role is. Is assisting the parties in continuing their negotiation. So he gets drawn into the dispute, and yet he has to remain impartial and independent. So, next slide, please. So we find that those who come to use mediation come because it's faster compared to litigation, it's cheaper, it's private and confidential, it's less formal, and most importantly, parties remain in control of their dispute. And that's really where the psychology of mediation is, because the parties remain in control of their dispute. It's non-adjudicatory. So even the mediator doesn't suggest solutions, he basically tests the argument of the parties to get them to resolve. So that's a picture showing the view of the claimant. Second slide, next one. Next slide, please. Next one. Next slide. So we have both the plaintiff and defendant looking at the case, and it looks good to them. They obviously think the case looks good from both sides. Nobody can see anything wrong. And to go to my question, yes, there are psychological issues that affect decision-making in mediation. I've listed a number of them: anchoring, the parties' total availability, selective perception, reactive devaluation, optimistic overconfidence, attribution biases, framing effects, risk preference, endowment effects, and behavioral traps. Now, this all from the viewpoint of being a cognitive behavioral therapist are things that I deal with every day in the mediation room. I'll take a few of them and just highlight them. Number one is optimistic overconfidence. Yeah, can I have that slide? So you have the parties coming in, and the lawyers have done a very good analysis of the matter, and they've been told that they have a good case. Even where parties are not represented by counsel, they still believe that I have a very good case. this is very more common when the relationships get closer, like in family cases, in trust, in estates, in wills. You have more emotions because the parties feel they are right, and there are decades of relationships that are in layers there. Now, when it comes to commercial mediation, it's a bit more arm's length, and parties basically look at the contract, look at the same set of facts, and the lawyers come and say, I have a 90% chance that I'm going to win in court. Now, 90 plus 90 is 180. So that's obviously over bloated. So we really have a 100% chance of winning in court. So we have over optimistic, overconfidence. So the same legal or factual issues, parties look at it and they say, if I go to court, I will win. And even when there are multi-facet issues, parties still get entrenched in this situation, and obviously that gives them impasse and affects the mediation. Again, you have the framing effect. So you have the disputant looking at the matter with the lens in which it determines what the outcome will be. So a party who is very, very well off financially will definitely reject settlements in financial terms because he has the financial power to say no. But a party is almost going bankrupt will be more amenable in a mediation process to get some income in and alleviate his position, and that affects his psychology because he doesn't want a prolonged battle in the courts and where he doesn't even know the outcome. So in that frame, he's less aggressive and is more amenable to resolve the dispute. So you have parties both have aggressive aspirations, like Tony mentioned. They come with a lot of anger, a lot of emotions, and this frames their decision making in mediation. Of course, in clinical psychology, we say once the hormones kick in, the logical reasoning and rational reasoning jumps out. So the likelihood of impasse is likely to occur. Can I have the next one, please? The next one is the reactive devaluation. So where we look at offers made by the other side as basically too low. So once the other party proposes a settlement or proposes a terms, we quickly devalue it for the simple reason that it wasn't made by us. It's just made by the other side. You have this especially in banking, bank customer mediation, or in construction disputes, where you have two contractors or subcontractors, they both quickly devalue offers, and as a mediator, it's such a hot potato to balance the interests of these parties because there's so much anger at what the profits or the quantum or the margin of these issues are. So when you have issues in tort, where you are dealing with liability or negligence, then it may be easier. But when it comes to issues that have quantum in them, then reactive devaluation occurs, where people look at the time value of money and in terms of profit, and obviously you have an impasse again, and it's a barrier to mediation. Can I have the next one, please? Again, we have the endowment effect. So we find that this is when people own an item, they basically think it's the best. So you have the coffee mug experiment, very popular, done by Professor Russell. And it says, it takes a mug and says to the man who owns the mug, how much is your mug worth? He says it's worth $7. It says to someone who's going to buy the mug, how much is it worth? He said, I won't buy the mug for more than $3. Then he says to someone who wants to choose a mug or money, which one has more value? And of course, he ends up about $4. So basically, you find that when people own items, they basically put more value on them. What is mine is better. So when you come to mediation, you find that this endowment effect is a big barrier because parties who own items are not willing to give up their rights or their entitlements because they feel that it will be a devaluation. And so they hold on to them, and it's such a great impasse getting them to yield and meet in the middle. Because the ultimate aim of the mediator, like Tony pointed out, is to get a win-win solution, a binary solution from the courts, which is win-lose, is not acceptable in mediation. So the standard in mediation is quite different. Now we have selective perception, where you have people who have risk those who are risk averse and those who are high risk thresholds. I did a matter between a gambling body and a gambler, and I was a financial matter, and obviously we came very close to settlement, and when it came almost to tossing a dice, the plaintiff, who was the person who gambled, obviously didn't accept the settlement, and as far as I was concerned, he was gambling again with the settlement. He said he would take his chance in court, even when it was obvious that the judge even said, I'm not going to look at it from your point of view. But obviously, he had a high risk threshold, so he didn't settle. He preferred to refer the matter back to court. So parties' perception of risk is very important. And again, I said that is always framed in the context of the particular situations. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, we also have the attribution biases. So parties come to mediation with anger, and for the simple reason that they want to vindicate their position against their adversary, and this is very difficult because it makes solution extremely difficult, because the party says it's not my fault, it's your fault. So the man missed the flight. I did a matter between a client and a travel agent who missed his flight, and as far as he was concerned, the travel agency should have sent him an email reminding him that his flight was the next day. So even when the travel agency was offering him vouchers and future discounts on tickets, he wanted a full refund of his money because he said the travel agent failed to send him an email a day before his flight, that he deserved to be reminded of his flight. Now that's pure attribution bias. I mean, if you look at it as a reasonable third party, why will a travel agent remind you of your flight? You bought the ticket, you chose the dates. But that's attribution bias. So there was a great impediment to that settlement because the party could just not see any fault in himself. And that's always something we find in mediation. Parties can't look outside of their position and they attribute all the blame to the other party, and then you can't move on. Can I have the next one, please? So the mediator has a very tough job in bargaining. You have to get the parties on stock to even look at the new offer and to change their position and shift in their interest. Then you have to get them bargaining, which is what you have especially in Australia or some other climes, the shuttle diplomacy. You have to get significant movements in the bargaining process and get them to make multiple concessions and reformulate their interests and close the gap. And this is where the difficult job of the mediator is. Mediation is not therapy. Parties come to mediation with different mindsets, like Tony said, different mental states. But the mediator is not a counselor, is not a therapist, is a dispute resolution practitioner. So you need to draw a very thin line between actually providing therapy and counsel to the parties and getting them to shift position. And this is why the psychology of mediation is such an interesting topic, because you have to get involved without getting involved. Can I have the second to the last slide? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adiyemi, for that very insightful, discussion on the impediments of mediation, what actually leads to and why people are, the disputes many times not resolved. If Olga, do you want to add in brief about what Dr. Adiyemi said on this?
Thank you very much. First of all, this analysis by Doctor is marvelous. I mean, he covered everything. I have to stress some things about mediation in Greece, because when a mediator from other country comes in Greece to try to resolve a dispute, he has to find some obstacles that has to overcome. These obstacles are first, what is the evolution of mediation? And in general, all these ADR institutions in Greece, and especially how this ADR faced by lawyers, and secondly, the culture of the parties, because in Greece we have some differences in the culture that rely on, depend on where the parties live, or all these things that I will say in the moment. Starting from culture, education, and other populations characteristics are crucial for the mediation practice, because all the above shape the way that people face conflicts and how they are willing to resolve them in case in any case, commercial, civil, or family cases. A special culture that affects even the index of education and other institutions consists of unwritten rules and a customized way of thinking, feeling, and reacting. Cultural groups are defined by a range of factors. There are difference in age, gender, language, ethnicity, religious, etc. Cultural diversities, either in cross-border mediation or in national mediation, may lead to unexpected situations. So this is an obstacle that mediator has to overcome. For example, in Greece, we have in commercial disputes, or even worse, in family disputes, the parties may have a variety. One may come from a big city, or the other from a smaller city. And the customs that they may have, because they live in different cultural effects, may absolutely affect their personalities and the way of they are facing the dispute and the mediation. Of course, we have to acknowledge how parties and lawyers face the courts and ADR, alternative dispute resolutions. I would like to make a reference to our litigation here, to our laws, mediation laws here in Greece, because even though that in Greece we knew mediation as an institute from the ancient years, because, for example, in Crete, the big island in South Greece, had similar to mediation institution that was called sasmos. This mediation style where a sastis, that was a mediator, tried to put people together and resolve their disputes. But though we had this history, we are not familiar to mediation, even with our law, the first mediation law that was in 2010, that was a ratification of European Union Directive of 2008, that was the Directive 52. 5-bar association in Greece trying to establish institutes for teaching mediators how to mediate and proceed with the accreditation of mediation. But though I don't think that over these 10 years the scope, the purpose has achieved. The grad amendment was with the law of last year, because then we had faced mediation as a mandatory first session of dispute resolution. So with this first session, we are trying to make more familiar to everyone, parties and lawyers, all these skills and all this procedure that mediation may carry. So in Greece, we are still in the beginning, though 10 years have passed from the first mediation law. And my personal view is that is selected by practice, that lawyers have to acknowledge the advantages of mediation in order to communicate it to their clients, the parties of the dispute, and of course to start being confident towards mediation. And this is the biggest bet for mediators and mediation to overcome. And I think that this is the biggest impediment, the denial of lawyers and parties, and the doubts about mediation, at least in my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga, for taking us through the impediments. And also, coming out with one major issue, which I think what we have just heard is about what goes in the mindset of the people. But the question is how that mindset is framed, how people come to those kind of mindset, why they think the way they think, even including all the parties, the mediators, or the counsel centers. So I think culture plays a very important role in framing out the mindset of the people involved in mediation. Therefore, I would now, in this context, would invite Dr. Paul to throw some more light on this issue, the cultural issue and the cross-cultural impact of psychology in mediation.
Thanks, Samir. Can I just compliment my colleagues, because they've pretty much described the issues that we're likely to encounter when we're talking about cross-cultural issues. But perhaps I could just tell you two quick stories which will help illustrate this. And one comes from our own Aboriginal people who have been in Australia for some 65,000, 70,000 years. And I've done a lot of work in Aboriginal communities. And if I am to look face to face with an Aboriginal person, particularly in conflict, they will move, they will keep moving to the side so that we do not have direct eye-to-eye contact. And yet, from an Anglo-Celtic perspective, we think that eye-to-eye contact, face-to-face, is the way to deal with people. And you try doing that with Aboriginal people, particularly in conflict, and you will end up just turning yourself in a circle because they will keep moving around to avoid the eye contact. And so that's one example where it's very difficult to actually crack, to understand what is the mindset that's actually affecting this particular behaviour. So that's one, sorry, just leave it there for a moment. Australians were killed in a terrorist attack on a bar in Bali. And the police arrested an alleged mastermind of the attack, and he was paraded and seen on television in Australia. And there was uproar in Australia because this person was seen to be smiling. And in our culture, a smile is taken as a friendly gesture, as an openness, a sort of a willingness to engage. And Australians assumed that the behaviour of this particular person should be one of shame, and that they should be looking up. They should, in fact, have their head bowed and their eyes down, and certainly not smiling. Now, after we unpacked all of that, and because it wasn't a mediation per se, but ultimately we came to understand that in the Balinese culture, smiling was actually a sign of embarrassment. And so my point about this cross-cultural stuff is that we actually come to it with our own assumptions, with our own biases, many of which our colleague Dr. Adamaya has already spoken about. But we also come to it with differences in perception about what people say and what people do. And so I guess in the work that I've done internationally, I say there are two very simple things that mediators can do. The first is co-mediation. And in the work that I've done, the cross-border work that I've done in Europe, I work with a female Italian lawyer who is also a mediator. And so when you put her and I together, we're able to then talk about different language systems, different cultural systems, different gender systems, different age systems. And what we're doing there is we're able to rub off one another the differences in the perceptions that we might have from our own biases and backgrounds. So that's one of the things that I suggest to people, that co-mediation is a really sophisticated technique, because you have to practice it to get it right, but it's a very useful technique. The second thing that I do in cross-cultural mediation is I get people to tell stories. And the story might be as simple as, tell us about your life. Tell us about what a day in your life might be like. Tell us a little bit about your family. Tell us about the sort of food that you eat in your home. They are seemingly really simple questions, but what you're trying to do, and sort of Tony and Olga have already got at it, that what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the mindset of the parties. And they've come to the mediation, they've got quite different mindsets, they're in quite different emotional states. And sometimes the simplest way to calm the emotions and to start to understand the cultures is to actually get them to tell stories. And I frame it a little bit. I sort of tell a little bit of a story myself about, you know, the sort of questions that I think we could play with. And I ask my co-mediator to do the same sort of thing, so that we are, by demonstrating a model that they might then use to tell stories. Now, what's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of that is that you've taken these two cultures which are seemingly different, not well understood, with different assumptions and perceptions, and gradually bring them together in a way where they can then understand why one might see the issue differently from the other. Now, I know they're just two simple techniques, but I think from a mediation perspective, we can make the whole issue of psychology extremely difficult, when in fact we can take the psychology and we can put it into simple mechanisms, and the mechanisms will then help us, because my perspective on mediation is that a mediator is a process manager, and you are designing and conducting a process. And so long as you do that well and you follow the process, that you'll indeed get an outcome. So they would be my simple comments that I would make about this subject.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, it was very interesting to listen to your stories. In fact, I just got so much involved. And it reminds me of, you know, when you're talking of that cultural aspect, you know, even from the Indian perspective, you know, the majority of Indian, especially during the trade and commercial discussions, or even otherwise, you know, they have this habit of every time nodding their head, you know, but it doesn't mean that they are agreeing with you. Most of the time, it means that they are simply hearing you out and nothing more than that. So nodding your head doesn't mean that they agree with you. So these are some, you know, some of the aspects which the mediator especially must also be conversant, you know, especially in cross-border mediations. So that was a very interesting, you know, topic and discussion what Dr. Paul just mentioned to us, and that takes us back to Dr. Adeyemi. You touched on the issue of bias during your last talk. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on the issues of bias and personality types and emotional intelligence which are involved in from the psychological perspective in mediation?
Okay. Well, I must thank Paul for a most excellent presentation. The use of storytelling is one of the best ways of introspection and getting parties to look closely at themselves, so that then you start to understand the position of the other party. So when you do the basic mediation skills training, the 40-hour training, the gold standard, you are taught active listening, Socratic questioning, you're taught probing, exploration, empathy, and all of this really are things that are really preparing you to overcome bias and challenges in the mediation room. So yes, when you come to mediation, you have different personalities. You have the choleric, you have the phlegmatic, you have the melancholic personality coming either as a disputant or as a counsel. And these are the huge bearing on the mediation process. I had a tenant landlord mediation recently, and no, I don't need the slides. And the tenant was a very, very strong choleric. So for about 4 hours of mediation, I sat down. He walked out about 4 times and walked back in, and I just kept my tone very low. I didn't look at him straight in the face, and I just kept on with the process, and eventually we settled. Why did that settlement occur? Because I realized he was choleric, and I knew that if I get up or I asked him to come back into the room or ask him to decide if he wants to stay or leave, I'm challenging his personality, and he will want to dominate this situation, and we won't settle. So it's important that you understand who you're dealing with, because we are a product of who we are. We can't help ourselves. Our personality makeup, it will definitely reflect in our decision-making and our relationships, and also in our ability to manage anger, because mediation is a very angry process. And I'll talk about that quickly when you talk about what you call IDR model. In IDR model, parties come to mediation with an inflated position. So they feel that, I'm right, I'm going to win. Even if we go to court, I will still win. And so they come in there, and when they get into the room, they get deflated and disappointment. So disappointing because suddenly they find that now I'm talking about settlement and I'm not going to get what I thought I would get before. So again, anger, mood, emotions, hormones, all of it at work. And then finally, like Paul said, the mediator drives the process to the R, which is the realistic or the resolution phase. And that's really the standard. So what is success in mediation? Success in mediation is not settlement. No, you don't have to settle. It's following the standard in bringing the parties to continue their negotiation, look at their position, deal with their interests, overcome their biases and prejudices, hear the other side, listen to them, look at the